The question echoes across the world. Is the United States the biggest bully of our time? For many, the answer is not just yes, it's undeniable. For decades, Washington has carried itself as the self-appointed guardian of global order, armed with unmatched military power and the ability to bend economies with the stroke of a sanction. When America speaks, most nations fall in line, but not all. Some refuse to stay silent, and in those moments, the mask of power slips. Take Senegal. A nation not known for loud defiance suddenly stood up to the United States. Why? Because Washington decided to punish several representatives of the International Criminal Court, one of whom happened to be a citizen of Senegal. Sanctions, cold, calculated, designed to isolate. But Senegal asked the question few dare to ask. Who gave America the right? This was more than a diplomatic dispute. It was a crack in the armor of US dominance. For the first time, the bully had been called out on the global stage. The world watched as a quiet dawn turned into a firestorm. On October 7th, 2023, Gaza and Israel crossed a line that would change everything. Hamas and other Palestinian fighters launched a surprise attack that shattered lives in hours. Over 1,000 people were killed and hundreds taken hostage. Israel struck back immediately and with force. What followed was relentless. Airstrikes tore through the Gaza Strip, raids swept across crowded neighborhoods, and a blockade tightened around an already suffocated land. Reports say more than 60,000 Palestinians have been killed since then, nearly half of them women and children, with well over 100,000 injured. The numbers may vary depending on the source, but the grief behind them remains undeniable. The war didn't just divide Gaza and Israel, it split the entire world. One side condemned Israel's actions, calling them genocide. The other, led firmly by the United States, stood in full support of Israel. This was no surprise. For decades, Israel has been Washington's closest ally in the Middle East, receiving unwavering military aid and diplomatic cover. And with that bond in place, America expected nations around the globe to either stand with Israel or remain silent. But silence is beginning to crack. Some countries no longer accept Washington's script. Some voices refuse to be muted. And behind the headlines lies the harder question. Who has the power to define justice when the world's strongest nation already picked a side? South Africa did what few believed possible. It stood up to the United States and dragged Israel before the world's highest stage of justice, accusing it of genocide against the people of Palestine. The court in question? None other than the International Criminal Court. But what exactly is this powerful body? The idea of such a court was born in the ashes of World War II. After the Allied powers tried Nazi and Japanese leaders at the Nuremberg and Tokyo tribunals, world leaders saw the need for a permanent court that could prosecute the worst crimes, no matter who committed them. The idea lingered for decades, but it wasn't until 1998 that the Rome Statute gave birth to the ICC. By 2002, it became fully operational. The ICC was designed to be the court of last resort. Its mission is clear: to hold accountable those who commit the gravest crimes: genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and the crime of aggression. It steps in when national courts cannot or will not act. Its existence is a warning to leaders and generals alike that no matter how powerful you are, the world is watching, and there is a place where impunity ends. But guess what? Since its creation, the International Criminal Court has only gone after leaders from the global south, mostly Africa. Presidents, generals, and rebels from third world nations filled the dock. Meanwhile, powerful Western states and their allies, responsible for wars, invasions, and bombings, were never touched. The double standard was obvious. And now, that imbalance was about to be tested for the first time. For the very first time, a Western ally, Israel, was dragged before the ICC. And the one to do it wasn't Europe, wasn't Asia. It was an African nation, South Africa. The move shook Washington. The United States was furious. According to them, South Africa had no business accusing Israel of genocide. We all remember the pressure campaign. Under President Joe Biden, Washington threatened sanctions and even hinted at removing South Africa from the AGOA trade pact. When Donald Trump returned to the White House, he turned threats into punishment. He slashed aid to South Africa and slapped a 30% tariff on its goods, the highest imposed on any African nation. The message was clear: South Africa had crossed a red line. But here's the twist. America's reaction only fueled the question that won't go away. Why is justice only acceptable when it's applied to the weak? South Africa won. Against all odds, it forced the International Criminal Court to act. The ruling was historic. Israel was charged with genocide. The court ordered its army to halt the assault on Gaza and withdraw from Rafah. And for the first time, it called for the arrest of an Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. Presiding over the case was ICC Judge Nicolas Guillou, a Frenchman who made legal history. But the story didn't end there. In fact, it took a darker turn. Instead of respecting the ruling, the United States turned its sights on the ICC itself. In May 2024, under Joe Biden's presidency, Washington threatened sanctions on the court and its judges. It was a warning shot. Don't touch America's allies, and don't touch America's wars. Then came June 2025. Donald Trump, back in power, did what Biden had only threatened. He imposed sanctions on ICC officials, judges from Benin, Uganda, Peru, and Slovenia. A few days later, more names were added to the list. 4 senior judges, including one from France and another from Canada. Both had been involved in cases against Israeli politicians and investigations into U.S. military operations in Afghanistan. What began as South Africa's bold act of justice had now spiraled into a full-blown clash. On one side stood a court built to end impunity. On the other stood the world's most powerful nation, willing to crush it. Among the targets was Judge Nicolas Guillou, the very man who presided over the case that issued an arrest warrant for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. His role had already shaken political circles in Europe. Now, Washington had placed him on a blacklist. Another was Canadian Judge Kimberly Prost, who dared to authorize an investigation into alleged crimes committed during the war in Afghanistan, including by U.S. forces themselves. By sanctioning her, the United States wasn't just defending an ally, it was protecting its own record from scrutiny. The list didn't stop there. Deputy Prosecutor Nazat Shamim Khan from Fiji and Deputy Prosecutor Mame Mandiaye Nyang from Senegal were also hit. These were not enemies of America. They were respected international jurists. Yet overnight, they were treated as if they were adversaries of the United States. The sanctions were harsh. Entry to the U.S. was barred. Any assets on American soil would be frozen. These are measures usually reserved for hostile regimes, not for judges and prosecutors from allied nations. And with that, America sent a chilling message. When justice threatens its power or its friends, justice itself becomes the enemy. The backlash was swift. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio branded the International Criminal Court a national security threat. In his words, the ICC had become an instrument of lawfare against America and its closest ally, Israel. He insisted that the sanctioned judges had crossed a line by daring to investigate U.S. or Israeli officials without their consent. The State Department doubled down. It accused Deputy Prosecutors Nyang and Khan of backing what it called illegitimate ICC actions. Specifically, the arrest warrants against Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. And in Tel Aviv, Netanyahu's office openly praised Washington for striking back at the court, celebrating the sanctions as if justice itself had been defeated. But wait a minute, isn't the ICC supposed to be independent of every nation? How can a single country claim the power to override an international court created to hold all nations accountable? If one country can simply ignore rulings and punish the judges who issue them, what does that mean for human rights, for justice, for the victims who depend on the ICC? Because if the world's most powerful nation can walk away from international law, then why should anyone else obey it? And if the system crumbles for one, doesn't it crumble for all? And here's the contradiction that cannot be ignored. The very same United States that sanctioned the ICC for daring to investigate Israel once stood proudly behind the court when it targeted leaders in Sudan and Libya. Back then, Washington praised the ICC as a defender of justice. Now, when the spotlight shifts toward America and its ally, suddenly the court is an enemy. Isn't that the very definition of hypocrisy? Isn't that oppression dressed up as foreign policy? Human rights defenders see the danger clearly. Maître Idrissa Traoré, Secretary General of the International Federation for Human Rights, warned that the situation is spiraling. In his words, things are getting worse. especially since the American president now feels invested with greater power and presents himself as both the great peacemaker and one who only respects his own wishes. Imagine that. The man who claims to bring peace insists the law bends only to him. Is this not the behavior of a dictator? Yet the world refuses to use that word. No headlines, no outrage, no sanctions. Now imagine if it were different. If it were an African leader who defied the ICC, ignored its rulings, and punished its judges, what would happen? That leader would be branded a tyrant overnight. Sanctions would rain down from every corner of the West. And yet, when America does it, the world falls silent. The warnings grew louder. The ICC's own Secretary General admitted that America's pressure is not just political, it is crippling the court itself. Funding is shrinking. Proceedings are dragging. Even NGOs and individuals who help with investigations now tread carefully, afraid to provoke Washington's anger. In his words, the proceedings before the ICC are progressing more slowly. But above all the organizations and individuals that help investigations on the ground must be very careful not to incur the wrath of the United States. This is the quiet power of a superpower. Not just bombs, not just sanctions, but fear. The court that was built to hold nations accountable is now forced to measure its steps, simply because one nation wields the threat of punishment. And according to Drissa Traore, America uses the ICC only when it suits its own politics. Now you see why the United States is called the biggest bully in the world. It bends the rules, ignores the law, and expects everyone else to obey. But here is the shift. More and more nations, especially across Africa, are no longer silent. They see the US for what it is, and they are not afraid to call it out. A few days after the US sanctioned ICC officials, Senegal pushed back, clearly and publicly. In a firm statement, the foreign ministry denounced the measures and urged Washington to lift them, calling the sanctions a grave violation of judicial independence. Dakar said it learned with surprise of the US move against 4 ICC magistrates. The ministry declared full solidarity with Senegal's own Mame Mandiaye Niang, stressing that ICC members must be free to carry out the mandate entrusted to them, calmly, lawfully, and without pressure. Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko went further. On social media, he vowed that the government of Senegal would confront what he called unjust and unfounded US measures. His message was unapologetic. Senegal will not be intimidated for defending international justice. The foreign ministry reaffirmed the country's unwavering support for the ICC and its mission to serve global criminal justice. It called on nations that back the court to show real solidarity, redouble efforts, in their words, so judges and staff can do their work in complete independence. Behind the legal language was a deeper warning. If powerful states can punish independent judges, then the court's work slows, witnesses hesitate, and justice falters. Senegal made it plain. That cannot stand. In drawing this line, Dakar sent a signal beyond the courtroom. Small or large, nations have a stake in a system where the law is not bent by fear. Senegal chose to say it out loud. We applaud the courage of Senegal for standing tall against the heavy hand of the United States. It takes boldness to confront such power, just as South Africa showed when it dared to bring Israel before the ICC. These acts of defiance are not just legal gestures. They are moral statements, shining a light on the truth the world has long known. America's only loyalty is to its own interests. Nothing more, nothing less. For years, Washington has dressed itself in the language of human rights, democracy, and justice. But strip away the speeches, and those ideals crumble into fairy tales. As Paul Kagame once said, the West, and America in particular, has been the worst abuser of human rights. That truth is written across history, from wars abroad to sanctions that starve nations into submission. The United States has no enduring principles, only calculations. Its true principle is its interest. That's why it embraces corrupt military dictators when they serve Washington's agenda, smiling as they trample their own people. And it's why the same America moves swiftly to crush or sanction leaders who dare to act independently, who dare to put their people above US priorities. This is the nature of the bully, to reward obedience and punish defiance, to hide self-interest behind noble words. But as Senegal and South Africa have shown, the world is changing. The bully's shadow is no longer untouchable. But does this mean that African leaders should cower before the US? Of course not. What Africa needs is to have leaders with backbone, leaders that are patriotic and not sellouts. Africa needs strong leaders like that of China and Russia. These countries have refused to back down despite threats from the US, and they are winning. African leaders can do the same. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe to our channel.